Hello, BookTube. Well, as hard as it is to believe, February is almost over. March is right upon us. We are at the end of February. So all the cool kids on BookTube are doing their March TBRs. And I want to be a cool kid on BookTube. It's never going to happen, but I want to be a cool kid on BookTube. The only problem with TBRs for me stands for to be read, for those of you who are new to the BookTube ecology. The only problem for me is that I don't do anything but read. So I can't do a March TBR, because I intend to read 1,000,000 books in March. I'm going to read a lot of books in March. I don't do anything else except care for my little bean. So other than that, it's reading and writing. But I'm a very fast writer. I spend most of my time reading, which means not that how fast you read means anything valuable, or not that how much you read is a goal of any kind. But it does mean that in any given month, as several of you have emailed to point out, I read more books than most people read in a year. That has no personal or moral value one way or another, but it does make normal TBR videos difficult because I can't do a 3-hour video about all the books that I'm going to read. I try to read all of the new releases, the new mainstream releases in all of the 15 or 16 genres that interest me in the American book market in any given year. That fills up a plate pretty quick. And that's not even taking into account the rereads, the older authors that I discover at places like the Brattle that I've never read. So they're not a reread, they're not new. And it's also not taking into account the fact that March is a widowmaker of a month when it comes to BookTube. There are events everywhere. Everywhere. There's Middle Grade March. There's March of the Mammoths. There's March Mystery Madness. There's Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. There's my own Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club and a bunch of other book clubs and a bunch of other read-alongs. It's brutal. And yet, it's fun. So it tends to crowd up a reading calendar. But nevertheless, despite all of that, I thought I would make a March TBR. I want to be one of the cool kids, and there are some books that I want to draw your attention to. And I have a procession of covers here. Some of these I have read, and some of them I have not. Some of them I've read in earlier editions, some of them not. So we'll just go through some of them and see what interests you. The first one is a novel, a kind of real-life autofiction diary as novel type thing, by Anatoly Kuznetsov, and it is Babi Yar, and it's about life in Nazi-occupied Ukraine. And it existed once upon a time, I believe at least once, in an English language edition. But it was that English language edition, the main one, the one that had any kind of circulation at all, was maimed and bawdlerized and truncated. And this new edition by Picador is, I gather, the whole thing. I don't know much about the textual history of this book, and I know nothing about the author. But I don't think I ever read that original version in English. So it'll be an exploration for me, which is fantastic. Then we have something, I think we saw this on this channel. This is by Jeremiah Johnson. This is Body of Proof, the 7 best reasons to believe in the resurrection of Jesus and why it matters today. Of course, the resurrection of Jesus matters if you're a Christian. And if you are a Christian, your belief in the resurrection of Jesus will be a tenet of your faith. It will not be a tenet of your ontologically provable worldview. So this book is off to the wrong start right away. If you could prove the resurrection of Jesus, there wouldn't be any other religions. There is no proof for the resurrection of Jesus, not in terms of the outside ontological, factually existing world. There is no proof for the resurrection of Jesus. There isn't even evidence. There's barely anecdotal stories of the resurrection of Jesus. Barely that. Proof would be something. Proof is typically, I don't know Jeremiah Johnson. I'm assuming that he is going to take the word proof and words like evidence and intentionally misunderstand what they are. Proof is something that you can pick up by the handles in one room, move to a different room on the other side of the world full of strangers, and show it to them, and they'll say, ah, yeah, okay. And nothing like that exists here. We have ancient documents whose purpose was to propagate a religion based on the facts they're claiming. That is not evidence. That is not proof. That is not anything. But so I imagine that this isn't a long book. I imagine that it's going to be fairly tired to me, points that I've gone over, that I've read a million times. And I could be wrong. We'll see. It might surprise me. But I imagine also that it will miss the central point, which is that this is not a matter of proof. The truth of the resurrection of Jesus Christ is an incredibly central point in the faith lives of millions of Christians. And that centrality, that truth, and the way it transforms their life, and the way it transforms the way they behave to others, that doesn't come from proof, from scientific proof. None of those people would say that it does. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point of it. So if you miss that in favor of saying, well, a rich man paid for his tomb, no. You're missing the point completely. You're also missing what constitutes proof. If you're going to write a book, a short book or a long book, giving me 7 proofs for the resurrection of Jesus, you had better never once mention the New Testament. Not only will you, if you do, for obvious reasons, you will not mention documents who have been propagated by a 2,000-year-old and extremely wealthy church in order to process the idea of their main character as a deity. You will, of course, not use those texts. Of course, you won't use those texts any more than you would use as contrarians often say, any more than you would use Spider-Man comic books as proof that a real Spider-Man exists. They would be the first thing you would discard. And if you discard them, you are left not only without proof of the resurrection, but without proof that Jesus ever existed. So let's just, I'm sure that I will encounter a lot in this book that I have encountered many times before that bores me. And I'm hoping that I encounter that one thing that would please me, which is for you to understand this thing that you're writing about, faith. It would be nice if one of these books would understand what faith is. It's the last thing in the world. I've met so many Christians in my life who were the best people I knew in their community and who were only forces for good in the world. You, listening to me, might be one of those Christians. I am sure that it never crosses your mind to think, well, I'm only doing this stuff because the proof is on my side. It is just what I'm trying to say. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of faith, Christian or any other faith. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the author's sole subject. But I will rant about it when I'm done. The book could surprise me. And we'll move on from that to something that is not debatable at all. This is Cruel King by K.A. Lind. Another in my ongoing quest to read every cover that Eric is on. He's shooting for Fabio's record. I think he will do it. He's still young. And this is a fake romance story. Those of you who read romance novels will know what that is. That is where 2 characters come together and they have to fake, for whatever reason, that they are affianced or in love or even married. They have to fake that for some external reason. And they both know, they're both clear-eyed ahead of time, but you know as a reader of the romance that a fake romance novel is going to end with the 2 people in love. It's going to end with the romance being real. And the fun of these books is just figuring out how that's going to happen. When is that going to happen? And also, is it going to happen to both at the same time? I like with most of the plot gimmicks for romances, I love the gimmick of the fake romance as long as it's done well. We'll see if this is done well. This is set in the contemporary age, obviously. Although I'm not sure that Eric wouldn't look good in Regency dress. I'm not sure. I bet he would. But this is about a casual serial dater, super billionaire hottie who has to convince people. He has arrived at a point in his life where he has to convince people that he is more than that he is capable of a committed relationship. And the woman who gets the task is someone they've had a fling before. I'm using fling here as a euphemism for all the stuff I'm sure the book will call it. I don't think I've ever read this author. So Cruel King will be my first indulgence. And then we have, this is by Kevin K.B. Burgess. I don't think I know this author. This is Dangerous Jesus. A work of Christian exhortation, but nevertheless one that the description of it leads me to believe has at least an interesting premise, which is that and it's a perennial premise. It's something that people were saying 500 years ago and more, which is that the fundamental messages of Jesus Christ, as embodied in the Gospels, are really disruptive. They're really dangerous. They conflict with the stereotypical image of Jesus as, well, as Christopher Hitchens never tired of putting it, meek and mild. They very much conflict with that, and it's not just a question of quotes plucked out of context of Jesus saying, I come to set brother or against husband against wife or anything like that, or I bring not peace but a sword. It's not about quotes like that. It's about the larger theology of Jesus, which is as disruptive as theology gets. It is meant to break the cycle. It is meant to permanently break the cycle of human behavior, because poison accumulates in that cycle. And the idea of Jesus is that the only person who could come along and say break that cycle had to be someone who wasn't human. And the teaching of Jesus is to break that cycle. So the cycle of violence, don't return violence. Turn your cheek. Someone is mean to you, do nothing. Someone vilifies you, love them. Someone hates you, strikes you, give them more. If they steal from you, give them even more. Give them the last thing you have. Someone says they're righteous, go to the people who aren't righteous. Help them. Help everyone. Give to everyone. It's a thing that's often been said about Christianity. I've said it myself, that if the teachings of Jesus were followed, the world would change. The key is here that this is the prisoner's dilemma writ large, which is that if you do it and no one else does it, everyone will take advantage of you. That's the running joke of Ned Flanders in The Simpsons. We shall see how much Kevin Burgess understands of his own subject. I know that sounds very condescending, but I encounter that all the time with books on various TBRs of mine. I think, all right, well, I'm heading into your subject, especially if it's Christian exhortation, especially that kind of pulpit thing, especially that. I go into the subject thinking, well, I know your subject. Do you? Or are you just playing for an audience, playing for money? We shall see. It could surprise me. Then this next one, to use a smooth segue, was very much a surprise. This next one was very much a surprise for me. This is a collection of individual DC Comics issues of a new iteration of a comic called World's Finest. For a long time, World's Finest was one of my favorite comic books. Long before most of your parents were born, there was a comic that came out every month called World's Finest, in which Superman and Batman teamed up. For a long time at the beginning of World's Finest, it was just a Superman story and a Batman story, and they didn't team up. But then fans wrote in and said, if we're going to have this comic, they maybe team up every month? They're our two favorite heroes. So they did. And World's Finest ran for a long time, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. You wouldn't think it would work, but because Superman and Batman are so completely different, the most powerful superhero and a superhero with no superpowers. You would think that in any adventure, Superman would just do everything. And also, they seem to be so opposite to each other. One is an icon of light, of optimism and hope, and the other is, at least in early incarnations and now in present incarnations, a dark avenger. But for most of the run of that old World's Finest, they were best friends. And also lookalikes, but let's not get into that. And they share a similar story. Their personal story is very similar. And when DC Comics announced that they were going to relaunch World's Finest, they were going to start it off with a new first issue, I expected the worst. Of course I did. I expected woke nonsense. DC Comics is absolutely infected with SJW woke nonsense. Their comics are virtually unreadable because of that. But they gave this to Mark Waid, who's a terrific comic book writer and it seemed to me an odd choice. When I saw that, I thought, all right, well, he's been performatively woke for years now. He's actually gone to court with people who are calling him that. So there's no chance that this won't be just Superman and Batman fumbling over everything because they're two white guys and the comic taking completely predictable turns after that. It certainly won't be a good comic book. And it was. It absolutely was. And it just kept being good month after month after month. It's still good. And I got a couple of those original issues and then thought, I'm going to want this in a book. This is good enough for me to reread. So I'm going to want this in a book. So I won't get any more of the issues. I'll just wait for the paperback. And the paperback is coming out. This is the Devil Neza, who's a character that Mark Waid introduces here. But this cover has none of that. This cover is just an evocation of our heroes. The Kent Family Farm, the Joker, Robin, Commissioner Gordon, Catwoman, Jimmy Olsen, Lois Lane, Perry White, the Daily Planet. It's just a great. I wish I had this as a poster. It's just a great evocation of the two characters. And then the story goes on from there. And the story does not do any of the stuff I was worried about. None at all. Despite the fact that Mark Waid is the writer, despite the fact that the colorist is Tamara Bonvillain, who was a poster child for SJW woke infiltration of superhero comics just a few years ago. There's none of that at all. The characters don't do any ridiculous Twitter posturing. Superman and Batman are friends. They are written in character wonderfully, but it's a character from the 1990s or even earlier than that. It has nothing. It doesn't. They don't act at all like their characters do in their own books, and as a result, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So I know a little bit of this. I will be happy to finish out the story of the Devil Mesa because I don't know how it ends. I stopped getting those issues. Then we have a novel. This is by Barbara Davis. This is The Echo of Old Books. Another in a growing trend of books about reading, about books and reading. Novels about books and reading. This is the story of a bookshop owner who is a book whisperer. She doesn't just love all of the accoutrements of print and paper books, which we all love. I think I'm loving it a little more intensely this week than usual because Amazon cannot reach in and change that print and paper magic. That's pretty nice. But in addition to all that, which every book lover can usually say, she also has a bit of telepathy when it comes to old books. She can sense a little bit about their owners. Not from marginalia or inscriptions, but from the book, sort of in a quasi-supernatural way. I'm interested to see the limits of that. I'm interested to see what this author will do. I don't think I've ever read Barbara Davis. Then we have an author I have read. I have read probably 500 books by this author. The author is J.R. Ward, and this is Forever, which is the second book in her set of... This author has written a lot of books about sexy vampires and has decided to branch out to sexy werewolves, and this is book number 2 in that series. I forget what the first one was called. It might have been Claimed or Fanged or something like that, but I loved it. Absolutely loved it. This author just has an easy, cheesy way of writing that I just love, so I'm sure that I will like this sequel. Then we have, I believe this is a debut, tremendously impressive. I think we saw it on this channel. This is Jacqueline Holland. This is The God of Endings. That starts off with our main character centuries ago, changing. Our main character changes. This is extremely eloquent as a book. It's extremely thoughtful. I think there's a part of me that very much resists the idea of simply calling this a vampire novel. That just is totally wrong. When you read it, you'll see what I mean. It just feels totally wrong to do. But our character dies and comes back, gets better, and suddenly is forever, is immortal, and is haunted by the title character, the God of Endings, this mysterious being that for the long length of the book is not explained. And instead we get the character's story as she progresses into the relatively modern era, feasting on the blood of living beings, not aging, extra strong, extra powerful. I know it sounds like I'm describing a vampire novel, and on one level, I'm sure I am, but you're going to see, when you read it, you'll see. I thought it was tremendously good, just tremendously good, especially for, if I'm right, it's a debut. Same thing with this one. This next one is a debut. I'm looking forward to it. Debuts are always so much fun. Or maybe this isn't a debut, because the cover says that the author's already written something. Well, it doesn't matter, because this is contemporary fiction, and we'll just see. We'll just see what that does for me. It usually doesn't do anything for me, but this is by Ann Napolitano, and this is Hello, Beautiful. The story of a boy and a girl who meet in college. The boy comes from a fractured and tragedy-haunted past. Worse than even what you might expect. Just horribly, horribly maimed. The girl comes from a boisterous, big family. So it's opposites who are attracted to each other here. We'll see what the author can do with it. It's an age-old story. It will all depend on execution. Then we have the next book in the Jewish Lives series, I think by Princeton. I've reviewed a couple of these things, and they are generally very interesting. It's another in the series, in the type of series that we've talked about before, where the editors of the series will get someone to write about a certain figure that fits the the umbrella of the series, and that person doesn't have to be an expert. They're given a brief. Excuse me. They're given a brief and a little time, and these are short books, and that happens in this case because the next Jewish Live series is about Maimonides, and it's by Alberto Manguel, who I don't think is a Maimonides scholar. I don't think he's a Maimonides expert at all. He's probably just been fascinated by the writings and the life of this figure. I read everything in the Jewish Live series anyway, but I'm looking forward to this. Now, I think that this is another novel, and I believe that this is a debut. I thought that Hello Beautiful was a debut, but it says on the cover that it's not the author's first book. So, but this one I think is. This is by Jenny Jackson, and it's called Pineapple Street. And it's a multi-voiced, multi-generational novel set in Gilded Age New York, probably ending up dealing with upper middle class Connecticut divorce, but it and Hello Beautiful continue this weird streak of American book covers being really good. And I read all this new fiction. I don't talk about it much, and I don't review it much, and I don't like it much most of the time, but I do read it hoping for that particular electric thrill that only a really good novel will give you. As much as I love history and biography, there's a particular thing that fiction can do. I hope for that with every one of these things. We'll see. We'll see. Then we have biography. I wish that it was designed in a different way, but I'm fascinated by it. This is by Larry Loftus, and it's called The Watchmaker's Daughter. And it's the story of Corrie ten Boom, who a lot of you will know. A lot of you read The Hiding Place, so a lot of you will know this author. And this is a biography of her, and I don't know how many other biographies there have been in English. I don't want to say right off the bat that there have been none, but there haven't been many. So we will see. We'll see what this one is like. And then we'll finish up this admittedly abbreviated March TBR. Should I make another one? Should I make another March TBR, or maybe two more? Maybe I should do that. Well, anyway, because it's fun to talk about upcoming books, especially at the very beginning of the month. We're going to end the month with a mammoth. It's a mammoth for March. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. It called to me so strongly that it was one of the only 2023 books that I read in 2022. I have since reread it, and I cannot praise it highly enough. It is an epic. I just don't know where you'll find the time. It's 1,000 pages long. It's by Carl Schlogel, and it's called The Soviet Century: Archaeology of a Lost World. And that's what this is. This is the author looking at the roughly 100 years that the Soviet Union existed. What it was like, what things it left behind. What impact did it leave behind? Not just archaeologically in terms of objects and junk and whatnot, but also psychologically. I thought this was tremendously impressive when I read it the first time. Then I read it the second time and saw so much more in it. And I wrote a full review of this, a 1,000-word review of this book that will be appearing in Big Canoe News in Northern Georgia, a very small print newspaper, comes out once a month, where I am the book section editor. And ordinarily, I write a column every month for Big Canoe News about forthcoming books. But ordinarily, the rest of it I give over to other writers. I don't take up the space myself, but it's my own venue, and it's a print newspaper, and I love this book so much, and I realize that it's a huge request of readers. It's an abstruse subject. It's going to feel stale or dusty to a lot of readers, and it's also enormous. So I realize that it needs, in my naive opinion, I thought it needed help. I'm sure this is going to get widely reviewed. But knowing that just induced me even more to write about it in my own section, to write about it in an actual newspaper. So I did that. That will have an online link. But there's also the print paper if you want to subscribe. If you want to subscribe to one of the only 2-page, completely dedicated book sections in the country. There's hardly any that do that. Some of the really biggest newspapers in the country have a pull-out book section every weekend. But anything the size of Big Canoe News, Big Canoe's distribution is pretty small. And that size, nobody does it. And Big Canoe does, and I'm their editor. I'm the editor for the book section. If you want to get that big block of a well-designed, bright, and colorful paper on your doorstep, feel free to subscribe. I think I leave the information in every video to go and subscribe, but you can easily look it up. And of course, if you see what Big Canoe is, and you like what you see, and you want the book section every month that I edit, that has a column by me every month, and you decide that you want it so much that you're willing to subscribe to Big Canoe to get it, feel free to let them know that that's the reason. Feel free to drop my name. That is invaluable for any editor or writer of any kind. But anyway, that is a March TBR all over the map. And the more I think about this, the more I think it's just not enough. I should do another TBR. I'll do a part 2, at least a part 2. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. It's gone on quite long enough. And I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.